You either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird MicroViews. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And today is the final end of Folktober.
It is.
It's been a joyous ride through Japanese folklore and tangentially folklore movies.
I feel like I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed my experience.
There is definitely a wide range to this genre in general, as we've talked about, where folk horror doesn't have it's not a full genre.
True.
And even as like a subgenre, there can always be folk horror elements without being fully folk horror, such as our movie today. We're covering Daimajin.
Yes, also known as Hajime.
Yeah, more Majin.
Majin, that's it.
That's his name is Majin, but the movie is Daimajin.
It is, though at one point it was named Majin.
No, that's his actual name in the movie.
I know. Yeah. The movie itself was originally called Majin.
Was it?
Yes, it was. It actually had a few times where the movie, between going to different owners, had a few different name changes.
The localizations.
Yes.
Yeah, not the actual. It's always been Daimajin in the Japanese.
Maybe.
Yes. No, it was. I'll get into that.
Okay.
So, Daimajin is written by Tetsuro Yoshida, directed by Kimiyoshi Yasuda, and it follows exiled children of a lord who are forced to save their land from an evil warlord who has angered a giant stone statue.
Yeah, that's a loose description of the plot.
It's basically the plot.
I mean, there's also, like, the whole samurai side bit.
Yeah, that's the exiled children.
No. There's an adult samurai who, like, is a huge part of this movie. He is not one of the children. I know this, because when the children grow up, they look similar.
But he needs them.
Yes, the whole thing is they need each other.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's the plot. He needs the children to fight the Lord.
Kind of.
Yes. But it stars Miwa Takada as Kozasa Hanabusa, Yoshihiko Ayoma as Tadafumi Hanabusa, and Jin Fujimaki as Kogenta Sarumaru.
Yes.
And some of these names you might recognize because Yoshida, as we talked about earlier this month, wrote the Daimajin trilogy, as well as the Yokai Monster trilogy and a few Zatoichi movies. Yoshida only directed the first Daimajin movie, but he did 2 of the Yokai Monster movies and worked quite a bit on Zatoichi. Takada was in our first MicroView of the month as well, as Okiku, as well as a couple Zatoichi movies. Aoyama appeared in the Great Yokai Wars, as well as Zatoichi movies. We're seeing a theme here.
We are.
As for Fujimaki, he has been in quite a bit, but I don't know anything. IMDb put him notably in Oniwaban and Guns Bloody Mire, and in his credits, the only movie I would have seen him in is Toys and Giants. Yeah, or Giants and Toys.
Can't say I'm familiar.
You might enjoy Giants and Toys. It's a weird movie about marketing.
I do love a weird movie about marketing. You have my interest.
Imagine it as, instead of 2 warring Yakuza clans, you have 2 warring marketing companies.
Oh, perfect. So, like, my friend's real-life job.
Yes.
Fantastic.
And for this MicroView, while normally we don't have resources, I do because I want to do a little bit more digging on Daimajin.
Of course.
We have commentary by Stuart Ballraith IV.
That's a great name.
Or Ballraith. Probably Ballraith.
I like Ballraith.
It probably doesn't. It's a Ballraith.
Sure.
Introduction to Daimajin by Kim Newman, as well as Being the Avenging God of Life.
Yes.
All from the Arrow collection, might I add, because this is a very cool box set.
It is a very cool box set. It also comes with a book, which I did read cover to cover.
It's a good book.
It's a very good book.
But part of the reason I also wanted to cover Daimajin is that while Death Kappa playfully borders the line between yokai and kaiju,
definitely,
Daimajin is quite a bit more serious take on this matter, or this kind of blending of the 2 genres.
Yes, definitely.
As well, its inspiration does come from outside of Japan, and I think it does an interesting job of really making the base idea more Japanese than before. I agree.
Oh, definitely.
And for this origin, and even the origin of Daimajin, we do really have to go back to where this comes from, because just where the idea for the film even originated. Because at the time, Japanese film was in the decline and American films were making more than the whole of the Japanese domestic movies. Even Kurosawa left Japan for Hollywood at this point.
Yes.
And during this time, Dai Studios often released double features, usually one historic and one modern. And at the time, in an effort to pull audiences away from the growing TV market at the time, which at the time we also have serial films that were doing very well.
Yes.
Like the aforementioned Zatoichi franchise, one of Japan's longest running serial movies.
Yep.
And in this, Daimajin was listed as A, and Gamera vs. Barugon was listed as the B movie.
Interesting choice.
Which was going to be the second Gamera movie. One source says Daimajin originated as one of the foes of Gamera. One theory is that Akinara Suzuki, head of Dai Kyoto, found an ancient clay statue photo and thought it would make a cool movie.
Sure.
There is a lot of inspiration for that. I'll get into that.
Yeah.
But supposedly the more believable origin is that Hisashi Ukada first pitched the idea of Daimajin as an adaptation of the legend, The Golem.
Yes.
Which the Golem we first saw on the silver screen in the partially lost 1915 German Empire flick, Der Golem, based on the 1950 novel of the same name by Gustav Meyrink.
Which, this is the theory I like most, specifically because the music for this is done by the same gentleman who did the music for Godzilla. In fact, he was working on them at the same time. And
that explains the Godzilla-ish theme sound of the music.
Which I love. There's an interview with him a few years after that the book cites, and he specifically claims to have purposefully made them very different, and yet I think they sound very similar. However, I do see some of his points where he said that when he was approached to do the music for Daimajin, he was told, we're doing a movie like Der Golem, we want it to sound like that. So he also backs up the story of Der Golem being an inspiration, at least musically, so it makes sense that we're going for a whole theme. Granted, he did say that he tried very hard not to make it sound like Godzilla, and that he was going for a more pre-Shinto styling with being heavy on the drums. So, I don't know if either Der Golem or Godzilla inspiration was truly makes sense, but I can see it.
I can see it a little bit too, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But Daimajin actually wasn't inspired by the 1920 Der Golem. It's based on the 1936 Czech French language film Le Golem.
Le Golem?
Yeah, which
I love that.
Walbraith noted this is the lesser version, and I haven't seen it. I've only seen the 1920 adaptation, but...
Same here. I will be checking it out, though, because apparently somebody liked it.
It's on YouTube, but I think the version I found didn't have English subtitles, sadly.
Oh, I can fix that. I've got some widgets that will solve my problem.
Okay, good. The reason why I think it's a little bit of maybe a mixture of all of that is because Daimajin is based off the Haniwa, which are from the Kofun period, and there are these clay figures that some are more humanistic that look very similar to Daimajin.
Yeah.
And others, if anyone's played Animal Crossing, look like the gyroids, which the gyroids I based off the Haniwa.
I do love the idea of little spooky gyroids from Animal Crossing haunting the people of Japan in this movie.
Terrifying them as a mountain god.
Woo, boop-a-doop.
Actually,
so cute.
I can see someone having that in their village and no one getting the reference.
Probably.
But Daimajin's armor is modeled after Keiko, or standing armor for the cavalry during the pre-samurai Kofun period.
Yeah.
To note, I think this is important to know because it shows it's given a certain level of antiquity to the deity that is known as Majin, as the Kofun period is the earliest recorded history of Japan, as well as it's the last period before the introduction of Buddhism to the country.
That makes sense. One of the writers for the book pointed out also an interesting point as far as when Daimajin seems to fictionally take place, because there's an emphasis on the Christianity part, which narrows down the history points, but doesn't exclude anything that you've said so far. So it all makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's actually set during the Sengoku era, so
Makes
it's
sense.
before the Edo period, before Japan closed off their doors to the West.
Of course, and before everyone went Super Saiyan, as we all know.
What?
Sengoku. My favorite superhero.
You're gonna piss off so many people with that.
That's okay.
And you're also you're making a play on Son Goku.
I am, in fact. Thank you.
Which is the Japanese version of Wukong.
Yeah.
But Daimajin itself, the movie, I think is interesting because, I mean, the opening is very thunderous and the credits are a bit Godzilla-y with their theming and whatnot.
Yes, I will not lie. Don't get me wrong. I enjoyed this movie so much that I will be watching the rest of them later this week. All two. And like maybe some TV shows if I can dig them up. But I was very disappointed at the beginning of this. This entrance bothered me.
Real quick, the TV shows I think are on Daily Motions or on Internet Archive.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I shall be Googling them. No, okay, so when this started, I went in as blind as I possibly could because I was ready to enjoy a giant monster-esque style movie as one does on a weekday night. And I had hoped that this was going to be the personification of the fear of earthquakes. And yet, within the first 5 minutes of any of these characters opening their goddamn mouths, they're like, the mountain god is coming! Ah! And I went, oh. Well, I mean, I'm sure the rest of the movie's fine, but really, we couldn't have, like, left it alone for, like, 5 seconds?
No, I mean, it's a pretty fun, spooky opening if you're setting up, like, a horror film.
This is true. I do love that the people in the hut fully forget about their infant child until, like, a rock almost falls on it. Mm-hmm. That's funny.
Yeah. Well, it's also setting up the nature between humans and nature.
True. Yes, there is. I mean, there's some strong correlations, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I was just looking for, like, more mystery. And, like, from the get-go, they're like, no, there's no mystery. We know what's doing this. He does this every Wednesday.
Well, it's not like the yokai monsters where it's based off of well-known yokai.
True.
This is having to set up what this thing is from the get-go so that we as an audience know. Because even in the West, it was changed. Some people think the name is Daimajin, even though it was released in the U.S. as Majin, the hideous idol. Yes. The devil got angry. Majin, monster of terror. Fury of the mountain god. And the giant Majin.
I do like Fury of the mountain god. That one, I think, rings the best.
Yeah. And even in the movie, his name isn't Daimajin.
No.
His name is Majin. Or also he's called Arakutsuma or Shino. But even with my quick Googling, what I thought was interesting, Daimajin is, if you break down each katakana, or not katakana, kanji,
yeah,
they roughly split apart into large devil god.
You know, not wrong.
Nope.
That's an accurate statement. I also love that from the get-go, this movie does a fantastic job of putting us with the two main plot lines that honestly, up until the end, really don't have a ton to do with each other.
Nope.
And yet, they do feel like they are parallel working together. Because we set them up from the beginning, as opposed to, like, halfway through the movie.
Well, and the way it sets it up, too, is very interesting, because there's the folk fears and the ritual of burning the straw effigy to appease their mountain god. Kind of similar to what the Haniwa were potentially used for. There's some state of, or I can't remember who it was the emperor at the time, although it wasn't practiced till afterwards. The Haniwa were supposedly or potentially created to replace human sacrifices.
I mean, that's nice. I do appreciate that.
But in comparison to the peasant folk, you have the nobility who kind of sit there and are like, oh, it's a protective spirit for them. They're like, oh, go send someone down to appease the peasants that, hey, we're with them too. But they don't give a shit about, like, the turmoil that's going to affect the peasantries.
This is true. They are terribly unbothered despite their children's fear.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, the movie has like two plots to it.
It does.
Because immediately from that introduction to roughly who Majin is, we quickly move to the story of oppression and political turmoil, very similar to the setup of Yokai Monsters 100 Monsters.
Speaking of Yokai Monsters 100 Monsters, you know who else makes an appearance in both the movie and this movie?
Daimajin appears in the Great Yokai War.
He does, but the lighting system also appears in both movies.
Shocking.
So, Daimajin is a blue screen technology for all of the suit parts. They got convinced to buy very expensive backlighting for the blue screen because they were worried it wouldn't look good.
Well, they invested in blue screen to begin with because before Daiei Studios wasn't doing any blue screen work.
Correct. So they doubled down. So they had the blue screen technology, and then they were told, if you buy these fancy lights that are very expensive to run, it will make the blue screen even better. That's what they're doing in the US. And before this, the studio had just had a whole bunch of like American actors come from US to work with them. And those actors like talked about like, oh, well, this is what we do. This is like, it's so interesting. You guys are still on this technology. How quaint. And so like they kind of felt the pressure. So they bought the fancy lights. These lights were fucking expensive, busted budget. And then they were like, well, we can't run them. They're also too damn expensive. Our electric bill is through the damn roof. So they put them in storage and didn't use them again until Great Yokai.
Well, and I mean, to be fair, well, probably the other two Daimajin movies too.
Well, definitely the second one. Third one, I cannot confirm.
Well, so that's one thing too, is the way they edited Daimajin in is so well done.
It looks great. Like, good on them for the financial investment.
Yeah, it's crisp, it's clean. It is definitely leagues above some of the other old like blue screening you see where it's very easy to tell that this is a tiny model against a big figure.
No, Daimajin himself in the screen looks phenomenal. I was super impressed, and we don't even get the King Kong hand problem where like you can tell where the prop is. And like granted it looks good and you're still impressed for the, like, oh, it's like good for the time. No, Daimajin looks pretty solid the whole time. And they have, like, people touching him regularly. Yeah. Like, I'm really impressed with how this movie turned out. I am sad that busted their budget, but, like...
Yeah, for all 15 minutes they had of Daimajin.
Yeah, that's the other thing
or
is...
Majin.
If you are watching this movie hoping for Godzilla, like, the first Godzilla amount of, like, monster... No, he's, like, barely in this movie.
Yeah. What did you think of them revealing the human face behind the mask?
I loved this. I thought this was really cool because I noticed that the actor who played the guy doesn't blink for the whole thing, and his eyes progressively get more and more bloodshot, and you can like see his eye twitching several times.
It's because they used potato starch for the dust that was all around him, so his eyes were getting worse and worse.
Poor man can't see. So no, I thought it looked really good. I thought it like added to this idea of like a spirit inhabiting the stone statues as opposed to like bringing it to life. Like, I don't know. It feels like a fine line to draw, but it does.
It gives it more personality than like Der Golem does.
100%. Because also, this guy, despite the only like acting part is his eyes, and yet it works so well because it's the fastest part on him, and he times it so perfectly to like actually look at the characters around him, even though they're blue screened in.
Yeah, no, it's a great way to give even just a little personality to a stone statue, basically.
Oh, and you can also, like, feel the whole, like, rampaging rage via the eye movements and stuff. Like, he very much feels like he's on, like, warpath. He doesn't feel like a mindless, like, robot. Like, sometimes I feel like Der Golem gets a little bit too close.
Yeah, or if you watch some of those older, like, sci-fi movies where the 100%. Robots turn evil. And...
Or even some of the, like, middle ground Frankenstein movies where it's not even about Frankenstein. It's about, like, the side characters. And they just, like, bring him to life for 5 minutes and he goes on a small rampage. Even those ones, you don't feel like that's a human. You feel like he's, like, a little robot that's just, like, wrecking town. This guy did a great job of making this move from, oh, he's just on a mindless rampage to angry god.
Well, and I think the way they bring him into being an angry god works so well, especially with the rise of the warlord and his tyrannical rule too.
They do a great job of making him also like actually tyrannical. Some, especially samurai films, will just like label someone tyrannical and you're like, okay, he seems to be running the house the same as the last guy. This guy, like, full on Ten Commandment Moses is like building statues in his backyard with slaves. So like, he feels properly villainy.
Yeah, it's not like the Lord in Kuroneko, who isn't supposed to be tyrannical, but there's kind of a line of, hey, the peasants are going to suffer because of your guys' war.
Yes, this is like proper, really like, that. And like, this is fast suffering too. This isn't like, oh, I've made some bad financial choices, everyone's eating hot dogs for the rest of eternity. Yeah. This is like, oh, while everyone was sleeping, I've enslaved you all. Time to beat some people.
Yeah, you guys are building a gate and you guys can't take care of your family. And so that's what leads them to seek...
the revolt.
Well, not even seek the revolt, seek help from Majin, who is, even though a wrathful god, kind of like their last hope. Even the kid's just running away because he's potentially going to be killed, which I do...
Mm-hmm.
So I do like where they force him into getting that help.
Yeah.
And I think they do a good job, especially between the kids who grew up around the mountain, making the mountain feel very beautiful. And
yes, yeah, having like the nice lighting through the trees and stuff.
Yeah, the gods' home feel like their home. Majin feel more protective and just part of nature.
Mm-hmm.
But when the kid goes to the mountain,
yeah,
they make him feel really small. Even then, the people who pursue him, also making them feel small, and the mountain feel very creepy, and also doing it from a kid's point of view. Which I do think the random animal mouse are super funny and cheesy. Especially like
I did too.
There's a camel in there for some reason.
Okay, so I found this scene extra funny because this child looks like the direct visual inspiration for a Ghibli wild child.
Mm-hmm.
He's got the hair, he's got the goofy costume, he's got the facial expression, like he looks straight out of a Ghibli film.
He's just missing a sister dying of plague.
Yeah, honestly, like a little bit. And then on top of it, he goes through what's essentially Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs Forest of Terror.
Yeah.
Which is just some creepy trees that he, like, imagines are hands.
Yeah, which I honestly...
I like it. But, like, I was giggling because I'm over here like, oh, poor him and Snow White.
Well, the edit, I think that's the part where, like, I really liked that portion because it's clearly a very bad plastic hand.
It's such a, like, from Spirit Halloween.
But when it springs back and it's the branch, I think that was a really nice little editing bit there.
I agree. The concept is really good. There's just too many overlapping references that make it a little bit silly. And then, out of nowhere, while you're thinking to yourself, I wonder if maybe Studio Ghibli got inspiration from, like, this type of, like, character. Because, like, we've seen this kid, honestly, in a few other movies. Not this actor, but, like, styling a kid in, like, ugly hand-me-down stuff that's stitched together poorly. Like, just put him in the worst Halloween wig you can find. Good enough. Like, he's not a cute kid. He's a little ugly. Let's add a mole to him. You know, like stuff like that, right? So we've seen this character design before. So I was, like, thinking to myself, I wonder if, like, Disney or Ghibli, like, took inspiration from these older movies when designing. Though, granted, I think Snow White predates this movie. But
oh, yeah, by quite a bit. I mean, this movie's 1966.
Yeah, so, you know, maybe vice versa there. But, like, I was thinking those thoughts. And as I'm thinking those thoughts, essentially, animals chewing on shit is flashed across the screen, which is a trigger for me. I hate chewing.
I know you do.
I especially hate mouth noises that come from my pets. And so I was like, oh God! I see the horror.
Well, and also there's the double exposure ghosts, which are
they're just tissue paper.
But I the thing is, like,
they're so cute.
Whereas, like, with the rest, where this writer and director would go, I kind of wish that they had done some more Japanesey.
I agree, but I really enjoyed seeing this collision of what was an interpretation of very old traditions, or an attempt at very old traditions of Japan, like predating anything. Like this mountain god is older than record, supposedly, right? With all of these very Christian clear influences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, instead of going for a Japanese ghost and spook, they went for standard, you know, American Halloween store ghost.
Yeah.
Like, instead of, like, you know, properly torturing Japanese style, we went for a cross for our, you know, heroes to die upon.
Yeah, it's like the Bloodthirsty trilogy where the vampires are very much your traditional Dracula.
Western vampires, as opposed to anything, you know.
The Taoists, hopping vampires.
Yeah, exactly. Or even just, like, a more creative, like, inspired by. Mm-hmm. No, this movie does, I think, a fantastic job of blending those two. I found it super interesting. Because a lot of the movies that we've gone through try to lean more heavily in either a modernized version of tradition or just like, oh, well, we'll come up with our own shit, which is cool, don't get me wrong. However, like, seeing these inspirations was really fun, especially because there's a lot of them that just, like, it feels like someone told you about the thing, but you haven't actually seen the thing firsthand. You know what I mean? Yeah,
you're getting the lore of this, or, like, it's the ghost story that's passed down from one person to another, and then you've never seen it, so your mind makes up whatever this thing could be.
Exactly.
And also, like, I think the way they interweave the story of bringing the nobility back into it to try and take back over their land after being away for so long, also works well because they don't succeed, and it forces them to take on Daimajin or bring in Majin. But the thing is, Majin isn't even really there for them. He's only there because the warlord has ordered his statue to be taken down, and they've pissed him off.
Yeah, they poked him in the forehead.
Yeah.
Which was a dope scene. But the other part that I thought was a very interesting, like, addition to the movie that I thought was subtle, but I think it works really well, is the power that they give the priestess. Mm-hmm. Like, so there's one priestess at the beginning who's very, like, traditionally styled and, like, but also clearly has some power because she's out here cursing people, and it seems to work.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, granted, it's not a direct, like, I've cursed you, and, like, shit catches fire, like some other... Like,
may your obituary be written in weasel piss.
Yeah, it's, like, curses like that, where she's very vague. But, I mean, like, she seems powerful enough to, like, actually do stuff. Yeah. And then when she's replaced by the new, younger priestess...
The daughter of the Lord.
Yeah. She, like, her ability is just to turn on and off the angry golem god.
No, not even then, because, like... That's the thing with this. We get 15 minutes of solid destruction with the god on the warpath.
It's a very good time.
But he just destroys, like, everything in his path. It doesn't matter if it's the gate, doesn't matter if it's the peasant home.
I was saying, at one point, he, like, fully yeets an actual peasant.
Yeah. Well, and he's not even really a savior. He's just there because he's pissed off. And her power doesn't even turn him on. One, she's crying, but it's not even her that wakes him up. It's the nail to the head.
True. He does wake up just because someone was attacking him.
And then on top of that, is about to step on her or step on her brother, but she steps in the way, and it's this whole self-sacrificial thing that I guess turns Daimajin or Majin. But that's what I think is why it takes the golem and makes it something so much different, because Majin really isn't a guardian in this movie. He doesn't really care for how much destruction is caused, just taking out whoever angered him, and sucks to be in his path. But that just makes him even more of a primitive god of, this is a god of destruction. He's a god of the mountains that you're stuck to the whims of nature. And
that is where my only real beef with this movie lies. Is I love the very obvious correlations between Daimajin, or, you know, the monster, and earthquakes and nature, right? Like the fears of the mountain that the mountain has with landslides and earthquakes and just disaster. Mm-hmm. And instead of, like, leaning in just a tiny bit into that, there's all these extra parallels happening throughout the movie, which I know they're put there because they already knew they were going to do 2 more of these suckers. They were already starting on them. So, like, I see the whole idea of, like, well, we can address all of that later. We're going to add a whole bunch of stuff so that way we have enough to, like, run a series. Because this was meant to be, I mean, they only made the 3, but they had wanted to do more.
Well, and that's the thing, because all three Daimajin movies were made in the same year. So all 3 movies came out in 1966.
They did, and then nothing.
But I do wonder, is maybe because it was partially successful, because that's the thing, is Majin falls apart at the end.
He does.
And that's
but,
the
like,
thing
his ghost orb thing does fly off into the distance.
Yeah, but,
which implies that maybe his ghost, if they just carve a new one, he might come back.
But that's the thing, is, like, it feels, especially with knowing where the movies go.
True.
There's other Majin statues.
Yes, there are. So,
like, I don't know. I just think it's, if they had that in mind, it was just an excuse to change locations for the next movie, so that way they didn't have to create an overarching story.
Probably.
They could just... because it's very much that same mentality of the Zatoichi movies.
Yes, where it's just episodic.
Yes, episodic minus a couple movies where they try and tie into each other, which we should go back to the Zatoichi movies at some point.
I agree, they're so good.
But it's also this... Majin is very much that Deus Ex Machina, where he is just that machine of the gods that solves the problems at the very end of the movie. The rest of the movie... No lesson really learned, just don't piss off Majin.
I mean, yes. Which is, again, like, it all plays into this, like, oh, it could have been much more nature-based, like, much clearer ties. But I also really firmly believe that, yes, they busted ass and made 3 of these in 1 year. I do think they meant to, like, jumpstart a mini series, and, like, this, they were looking to do 8 of these, let's be real. It's what they were hoping for.
Yeah, they were hoping for, like, the next Gamera, the next Godzilla.
They really were. And unfortunately, while Daimajin is very, very good, it's not that good.
No. it's entertaining, and the human story is interesting enough to keep you vested.
Yeah, but not enough to, like, switch humans in the next movie.
No, and well, it's also not, like, Majin isn't that much of a character, so I can definitely see this movie, like, turning people's heads away from... If you're going into this movie expecting Gamera, Mothra, Godzilla...
Yeah, it's not that.
No.
It's not. It is good, though, but I think something they didn't take into account when they were, like, writing all this is the reason why we have 1,800 Godzilla movies is because he's such a blank slate that you can just put any personality on him, and it works fine.
Yeah, or just make him the antagonist and give him random monsters to fight, like a Bira, a giant shrimp.
Just WWE Godzilla.
Crawfish.
Exactly. Whereas this one, like, has... someone thought too much about this for it to be a series, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because he has enough ties to, like, be a mountain god or a god of destruction and earthquake. Like, you know, he's got all that. The human side characters and plot were too well thought out for me to be like, all right, time to turn on some lazy TV and just watch the next one, because they're actually interesting, and I kind of need to pay attention to the political stuff that's happening.
Yep.
So, like, it's too good to be episodic, but it's also not good enough for me to be like, this treasured piece of history shall remain entombed on my shelf.
Yeah, and the characters, you don't really need anything else outside of them, outside of this one movie that they're in.
Yeah, no, exactly, because their story's done, right? Like, it's not like he's coming back, he crumbled to dust.
Yeah.
So we're not even worried about, like, oh, the next movie, what will our heroes do next? Like, we're not worried. They're all living their lives.
Yeah, they'd have to build a statue for him, but, I mean...
But why would they?
Exactly.
Like, why would you?
Well, because, yeah, exactly. He just destroyed your town. Granted, he did nail the warlord to the cross, but...
Which was very poetic, and also when it happened, my husband, who's normally not into these movies, and I was honestly shocked that he enjoyed this, goes, ooh, that's gonna be brutal.
Yeah.
Brian's only complaint, by the way, of this movie is that unfortunately the prop maker for the stone statue that's, like, embedded into the wall versus the human suit that gets worn for the Majin, the spike that goes into his forehead shrinks, which I'm sure was needed so that he could, like, walk around.
Yeah.
And not, like, have his, like, head costume piece fall off. It bothered Brian.
Great.
Just a little bit.
Good.
But also that was his only complaint, which... Honestly, very impressed.
That's good compared to some of these movies we've made him watch, like Death Kappa. Or no, he didn't watch Death Kappa.
He refused to watch Death Kappa, and honestly, I understand.
He should have.
Yeah.
So comparatively, I guess, to Death Kappa, arguably, Daimajin definitely takes the matter of blending the kaiju and the yokai very seriously, because that's the hard thing with this one. It's not, we don't have Matt Alt popping up to give that wink, wink, hey, what's the difference between a kaiju and a yokai?
No.
This one is such a blend of the two that well, not even like a yokai, but folklore in general.
I agree.
Where does the folklore end and where does the kaiju begin on Daimajin?
Well, and that's part of what I think is good about Daimajin is they do not address the fact that the giant living in the mountain, who regularly pre-Warlord apparently would go on rampages, enough that we had a whole ritual. Yeah. That wasn't even like it's lost time. No, like, they do this once a month, it feels like. Like, they were ready. They had an effigy already made.
No, they do it whenever the mountain's rumbling and angry.
Yeah, which is apparently frequently enough to have all of this shit pre-made and set up.
If you live by a mountain, then of course you're going to worship the mountain god.
Yeah, so, like, I like that there is less of a concern about whether the audience will know what this thing is versus just, like, letting it be what it is and it will fall into whatever category it does.
Yeah.
So if you're watching this from, like, a film history standpoint, I can understand wanting to qualify him as a kaiju. He's big, he's stomping, but also there's a lot of, like, godlike elements here.
Well, and not just that, but all the folklore, or not even just the folklore, the amount of historical information that ties into his design, and it's not just it feels like an inspiration, it feels like he's the embodiment of that pre-Buddhist era of Japan.
And then tie that with the details of the rituals and the priestess.
Yeah.
Like, all of that ties together to create this very specific, like, definition of ancient god. And it all works together. You don't need to know any of the history around, like, why her teeth are black, or, like, look at this little thing. You don't care.
No.
It doesn't actually add anything. It's fun to know, but it doesn't even take anything away not knowing.
No, exactly. But and that's what's fun about it too, is you don't need to know it.
Exactly.
But it makes it much better, in my opinion, to know a little bit about it.
I agree.
So, Chris, rent, buy, stream, or recline that we ever watched Daimajin despite having an audio recording of us watching it.
This is one of the few times that I will probably look for the Arrow collection myself. I really enjoyed the work they did to up the quality. I think it looks stunning without taking anything away, like some of the updated versions do, where they've erased lines. Like, I'm still mad at Disney for erasing the sketch lines on Snow White.
Yeah.
So, this one doesn't feel like you've lost anything. It still feels very original, but I can look at it without hurting my eyeballs. Mm-hmm. The music sounds amazing. I really enjoyed the special features on the DVD, and I really loved the book and the little pamphlet that came with it. So, I'm probably going to spend the extra money to buy the special DVD.
I think there's only the special DVD of this, and I know it was a limited run, so... You might have to go to eBay for this one.
That's okay. I have an eBay hound dog in the family. He can find it for me.
Well, good. I already own it, so...
You do. Would you buy it again, though?
If it came with if it came with more special features than what I already have. But yes, I do highly recommend, if you are a fan of Japanese folklore history and just film history in general, I think Daimajin is this nice little... in between, and especially the special features of Stuart Balbraith.
Yeah, definitely.
He does have a lot of information on the history of what was going on around that time.
I fully agree.
So it's not just that Daimajin's this one little artifact that falls between folklore and kaiju. It also falls in this weird little niche in Japanese film history that I think needs a little bit more exploration from many of us in the West.
Oh, I agree. I also really enjoyed the deep dive into the influences that we brought to them, because we talk a lot about the influences that Japan has on the rest of the world. It's very interesting to see how American cinema pushed them technologically.
Technologically, but story-wise, it was the Jewish Germans who were inspired, which I've learned recently that Japan has a lot of inspirations, not just in cinema, but in the way they run their or the way some of their government's set up, how some of their hospitals were set up.
Interesting.
Comes from Germany.
Very interesting.
Which also explains why Monster Dr. Tenma's in Germany studying medicine.
That does make more sense now.
Yeah. But yeah, that's it for Folktober. I'm glad we chose this one instead of some other random one we could have done. I agree. This one was really fun, and I honestly really do look forward to watching the rest of them. I'm excited for you to finish them, but I am also more excited for Nick Cage November, baby. Let's go. It is the happiest time of the year. For some. For us. For us. So yeah, look forward to that next week with our first deep dive. All right. Anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. Thanks for listening. Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.